And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Well, at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio on the Mighty Mighty Twitter, at Coalition_radio. And, of course, the original mothership representing 7 years of Coalition 1.0 digital analog programming on places like WPRO and WBOB, coalitionradio.us. Well, it's a late-night presentation tonight, but with everything going on up at Halitosis Hall, a.k.a. the State House, all credit to Rudy Cheeks, this is the most wonderful time of the year. This is the time of year the sausage gets made. This is the time of year when in the middle of the night, sleight of hands take place, and millions of dollars are often made, lost, won in the halls of Halitosis Hall, or as we like to say, in the halls of justice. Justice is, in fact, often found in the halls. An organization tonight is joining us for the very first time. I've known one of its organizers, Keith Fernandez, for a very long time. It's the Rhode Island Coalition of Housing Providers. Keith Fernandez is joining us in his capacity as president of the Providence Apartment Association. He's the head of the Rhode Island Coalition of Housing Providers. Carol O'Donnell is joining us. She is the chair of the Rhode Island Builders Association. And we've got some interested, if you will, civilians. Alyssa and Joe are joining us, and they're first-time buyers with a story to tell. And together, I think what we're going to try to do tonight is present really a picture, a portrait, if you will, of what it's like to be a real estate investor. For all of those who like to rail against, and this is, by the way, the opinion of station management, which is me, for all those who like to rail against the landlord, the rent is theft crowd, the folks that we're talking about tonight are very much local investors, members of their community who are seeking to develop assets in their community for the enjoyment of all, for the rental of all, to give Rhode Islanders a fair stake in staying in their communities. And I can't say enough about how important that is, because if Rhode Island, from my perspective, housing reaches a critical mass, then you will see an influx of outside investors with none of the concern, none of the connections, none of the familial connections, not being part of the community, buying up the housing stock of Rhode Island, and then all of us will truly suffer. I grew up in the New York metropolitan area, and just to reflect briefly on the period of rent control that occurred in New York City. And as attractive as rent control may seem to people, I can tell you from firsthand experience that rent control, where housing prices were essentially managed and price increases that reflect either inflation, increases in heating oil, any one of a number of facets, insurance costs, all the underlying costs were simply not reflected. And the impact, while it may have provided for some cheap rental deals for some people who then stayed in those buildings for an artificially long time, the overall impact to the community was, number one, the decimation physically of the housing stock, literally buildings that were not affordable to reinvest in, and as a result created substandard apartment availability for people in New York City. And number two, ultimately, the collapse of the housing stock in terms of availability, as entire blocks, entire areas of the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens in particular, who didn't have the type of competition or the wealth base that, say, Manhattan did at the time, and as a result, left people the worse for wear. It had exactly the opposite effect as intended, and really presented New York City with a substantial housing crisis that was only relieved years, literally it took years, after price controls and rent controls were alleviated. It was a terrible situation, a terrible time, and a lot of people suffered unnecessarily. So against that as a backdrop, my own personal opinion, I want to welcome Keith first to the show. Keith, thanks for joining us. It's great. After all these years, we've talked a lot to finally have you on the show. Tell me about the Rhode Island Coalition of Housing Providers, what your goals are, what your legislative challenges are. Yeah, paint us a picture of what's happening to small apartment investors in Rhode Island.
Well, thank you, Pat Ford. I've been promising that I'll come on your show, and it's been a while. And but thanks for having us over here. As you know, I've been involved with the Providence Apartment Association, and the city of Providence had changed their tax structure so as to tax investment properties, non-owner occupied properties, and unfortunately, the council and the mayor at that time, who was Angel Tavares, had a short-sighted approach to this issue. And today we are where we are with rising rents and so on and so forth. One of the prime causes behind that is the different tax structure in Providence. So, because of that experience with the Providence Apartment Association, when we heard that the State House in Rhode Island was now planning to introduce bills that were detrimental to landlords, that too in a pandemic, we decided that it was time to fight back because we were a voice that was not heard. If you've opened the papers, you watch any news television station, it's always about the tenant and it's never about the landlord. And we thought that it was time to change this narrative that landlords are this big, nameless, faceless corporate entity, a private equity firm out of New York that's providing housing to Rhode Islanders. And we wanted to show our elected representatives that the vast majority of housing providers in the state of Rhode Island are mom and pop renters, which is why we decided with a couple of other big groups. We had the Narragansett 2100, which is a lot of the housing providers down in South County. We have Rhode Island Real Estate Investors Group, which is a lot of people that are learning how to buy real estate, and Rick Cohn heads that up. George Nonis heads up Narragansett 2100. We have David Sullivan, who used to run the Rhode Island Landlord Association Facebook page. I mean, this gentleman was just running a Facebook page and doing his own thing and trying to be heard. And we said, let's get everybody together. And within that process, we were shocked, literally shocked at how many people have signed up to be part of the coalition. And as you have as one of your guests tonight, Carol O'Donnell as well, who's chair of the Builders Association, saw what was happening and she got involved. And now the group has just grown exponentially. So here we are dealing with a whole bunch of bills that I'm sure we're going to get into.
Talk about is there such a thing as an average member or a prototypical member? What type of organizations overall in terms of landlords? How many units? What type of units? Or is it really a reflection of the true melting pot of locally based real estate investors in Rhode Island?
So one of the interesting things that as we've been doing and as we've been adding members, one of the interesting things that I have found personally looking at what's going on, the vast majority of membership owns less than 5 or 10 properties. Now, the coalition has members that own 3,000 units. So we've got everybody from the biggest players down to Joe and Alyssa, who have just bought their first rental property. And, and they will share, like I said, they will share their story with you. The interesting thing about the demographics is what we found is that there are a lot of older white folks who own property. But there was a surprising twist as to a lot of the younger folks who are getting into the game are minorities, are millennials, are people of color. And that was something that really stood out when you actually looked at who was participating in all these, in all the activities in the group. And the kind of, the immediate thought that popped into my head was, these are exactly the kind of people that we should be encouraging to get into something, because it is a long-term strategy to build wealth. We always talk about how difficult things are for people and how it's hard for them to escape poverty because they have bad schools and so on and so forth. Here you actually have people that have started that process, bought their first property, bought their second property, minorities. And the state legislature is making it harder and harder and more difficult, and basically telling guys like Joe and Alyssa, hey, you know what, you're millennials, we don't need you to do this. Let's sell and get out and have a private equity firm buy it, because that's exactly what will happen if these bills pass.
Wow. I know from my own personal experience involved in commercial vehicles, I've seen both in Boston and Providence a surprising amount of first-generation arrivals to the United States who often seek employment and or ownership in two distinct businesses. And we're all well familiar with the mosaic of restaurants that we've got in Rhode Island. And what a blessing the immigrant community is to us in terms of the cultures they bring here, the food, and it's wonderful. We've got Peruvian restaurants, we've got Italian restaurants, and virtually everything in between. What's less obvious at surface value, unless you deal in the trades, is those same families are often looking to get into real estate as quickly as possible, understanding the role that has in their ascension to the middle class and or beyond. That the opportunities presented as such, both in terms of financial stability, in terms of the actual physically living for their family members, particularly as they join us here in the United States, but also in terms of the property management business that can be had. All of the issues surrounding commercial real estate and residential real estate management. And for so many of these folks, they are the ones who are sort of the urban pioneers going into some of the more challenging economically parts of the communities in places like Cranston and Warwick and West Warwick and Providence. And they are the ones who are creating wealth for their community by taking control of their community's real estate and investing in it and supporting local businesses and investing in it. It really is a complete picture that bodes well for the state, as long as we don't make the small investors the sacrificial lambs, if you will, of Rhode Island, and allow big out-of-state investors to come in and just buy buildings en masse. That's what will blow up communities. Which will create artificial levels of control in terms of rent. So what you're talking about with your organization is not the wealthy investor class of real estate. A lot of very successful people, but who very often more represent local ownership than they do some international real estate trust. Is that all a fair statement?
Absolutely, and that should be the intent of the state of Rhode Island, is to encourage people who live here, who work here, who invest in their communities, who know their communities. That's the whole idea, is to encourage them to buy more. I am very personally, I'm an immigrant. I'm from India. I came here with, not much money, and I found real estate to be my way to build wealth, or to build a sort of a career for myself. What I think that is missing in the state of Rhode Island is we are making it harder and harder and harder for people who are young to get into something like this and follow footsteps of many generations, to get out of poverty, to build wealth, to make something out of their lives. And when you have two people like Joe and Alyssa who are sitting over here, it's late at night, and they're sitting over here because they're absolutely worried about what's going to happen to them if these bills pass. That should never be the case. That is short-sighted. These politicians don't know what they're doing. I'm gonna say that, and I'll repeat that. They have no clue what they're doing when it comes to certain things. And the idea that this kind of stuff is going to help anybody is absolutely false. And we're gonna prove to you that it's going to be absolutely false. There are unintended consequences which they haven't thought about, and that's all going to come to the fore in testimony for the bills tomorrow.
Excellent. And Carol, maybe if you could introduce yourself and tell us about your organization's role in all of this, as well as what you folks have contributed to the state it's quite important.
Well, I'm chair of Rhode Island Builders, which is basically the only builders association here in Rhode Island. We have approximately 900 members. We're extremely concerned as a group about these bills because investors or financiers are going to look at multifamily construction in a different way because the owners are going to lose their rights in order to gather their rent, which then in turn will pay their mortgages. So you're going to look at a lot of builders that are going to decide, gee, we're not going to build this, we're not going to find people to buy them, we're not going to find investors to invest their money or banks to come in, and appraisals are going to change, down payments are going to change. So we have a housing shortage as it is. This will make it worse because most people are going to look at these bills and feel they're not going to have any personal rights in order to collect their rent. They're not going to want the builders to build them.
Right.
Or we have people, on a personal note, I also own quite a bit of rental property. And right now, I have vacancies that I'm choosing to keep vacant because looking at the bills, looking at some of the things that are going on right now, I'm concerned where I might be better off just having a few vacancies. So that contributes negatively to everyone in our state because we have a shortage of housing. And I hear from different builders, investors, because we kind of go through the same thing, that they're holding back on some of their rentals. And people are afraid. People are very much afraid, and it'll affect right to the building industry, the suppliers, and the bankers, and the appraisers.
Let me throw this out to both of you, and then we'll talk to Joe and Alyssa a bit, and then we'll get into the legislation. But this is going to sound like I'll let you interpret the question, but I think you'll also understand the importance to have the conversation. Why is it important that real estate investors make a profit on rental properties? I'll throw that out to Keith first. Why is that critical?
I don't know if that's a trick question, Pat. Then, but it's basic capitalism, correct? And I know people don't want to hear that, but when somebody buys a house as a rental investment for their family, one of the biggest misnomers out there is that a landlord buys a house and makes tons of money. If you have a mortgage, you're not making any money on the property. The payoff comes after 20 years, after 25 years of struggle. That's when the payoff comes. People are under this misconception that you buy a house and you're charging tenants all this rent and you're rolling in cash, and that's just not the truth. So if you buy a property, you need money for your expenses for the property. People upgrade their properties all the time. You need landscaping, snow services. You have things that break. You have a roof that needs to be replaced. If you do not have the ability to make some sort of profit, however meager that is, what is the incentive for me then to go ahead and, do those bushes or mow the lawn more than I have to, for example? So you have to have some sort of incentive for somebody to buy a house. And if that incentive is not immediate, it is going to be down the road. And that's the way most people look at it. If you talk to Joe and Alyssa, I'm sure they'll agree that eventually they'll probably buy a single family home, keep this as a rental property, but there's no profit coming in right now. Eventually that could be their retirement. That's my plan.
Well, and let's talk about a couple of the costs involved, just to give people some perspective. All of you run legitimate operations. You're fully insured. I mean, how much, for example, and just let's not make it specific, but sort of generic. I mean, a triple decker on the West End, what are we talking about broadly for things like insurance and property taxes? In a sense, what does it take you, Keith, to wake up in the morning? I'm sure it's not a number you want to think about most days, but literally, what does it take for you just simply to exist?
So for me, it's a little different. I have multiple businesses, correct? So I'm not really a good example of that. But I think what happens is, I'll give you Providence, for example. The tax rate in Providence is $24.56 per thousand. which is actually lower than it's been in at least 10 years at this point. At one point, we were over 32, 33 per thousand, correct? So if I take a two-family, I'll give you an example on the east side of Providence, okay? A two-family on the east side of Providence that I have, which is on Hope Street, pays about $8,000 in taxes before I open the doors a year. A two-family. So for me to pay a mortgage on that property and have income coming in to do the maintenance and all this kind of stuff, my rents are going to be absolutely higher compared to a place that's not charging as much in taxes around the state, for example. So Providence is unique in that respect. The real estate taxes for rental properties are out of control. Pat, you've been through this. You've seen it. You've seen the struggle. It's just ridiculous. So at the end of the day, I don't make any money on that property. However, I bought that property in 2007. We are in 2021. Okay. Another 5-7 years, I'm done. That's my retirement. That's how real estate works for most people, most small housing providers. We're not speculators. We're not flippers. I'm sure Carol has got properties that she's held on for decades as well. You know, we're not the kind of people that are buy, fix, flip, and sell. What this kind of legislation that is passing or is introduced is going to do is have all of us get out of the business, and you will get those people that don't care about what their rents are. You know, I charge $1,350 for a 2-bedroom apartment on Hope Street. You go beat that on Hope Street in Providence on the east side. Why? Because I have really good tenants that have been with me for a while. I've got tenants that have been with me 10, 15 years. People who work in Providence City, the executive chefs at major restaurants. But, you know, they're part of the community, and that's how I look at it. So, that to give you a real life example.
Thank you. Joe and Alyssa, tell us your story.
Okay, absolutely. So we are first-time home buyers. We are young investors. It's a 3-family in Westerly. And we bought it. It was partially occupied. 2 out of the 3 units had tenants in them already. So we intended to move into the 1 vacant unit and do any renovations required on it while we were living there. Due to conditions at the house, specifically in regards to one of the tenants, we were not able to move in. And at this point are living with my parents, actually, and we are renovating the house, you know, as we go. It was a long and lengthy process, but we did get the first floor tenants out, and now are down there and wrestling with that, and have a whole new bag of problems to get over. Fun, and so yeah, we're just trying to, you know, we're young professionals. We went to college. We got into our careers and realized that, you know, in order to you know, live as we wanted to and be able to support our, you know, families in the future and live comfortably like we'd like to, that, you know, just our professions might not be enough, and that we needed to do a little bit extra. So providing housing locally and getting into real estate was the way we thought could do that, and, you know, buying locally and supporting our community and being able to help provide, you know, quality, safe housing to people. And it's great. It's something that we really enjoy, but at the same time, with bills like this, you know, that are being proposed, it's becoming a big challenge. It's becoming a scare that, you know, everything we've done to this point might not have been the decision that we thought it was going into it. And, you know, realizing that in the future, if we wanted to be able to do what we were hoping to do, we may need to go to another state, unfortunately, which is not good for the Rhode Island economy. And I think will be a strong and you know, gross and obvious symptom of a bill like this being passed, is that it's gonna, you know, it's gonna immediately disrupt the the supply and demand curve, in the housing market right now, it's going to drive out investors, and it's going to leave a vacuum. And like in New York, I think eventually, the housing market will likely, collapse or fall out from under itself. And yeah, we're hoping to not have to deal with that.
Right. No, I understand. Carol and Keith, let's talk about the legislation. First of all, what on a practical level, what's happened to you, all of you as landlords during the pandemic? What are some of the issues you've had to deal with?
I think Carol has some good stories here. Carol?
Well, we have quite a few tenants, and for the most part, our tenants are good. We've helped them. They've had some difficulties, which in turn have been our difficulties. But the orders now, without being able to evict people, there are those that have taken advantage of that. It doesn't have anything to do with finances. They've gotten their COVID money, stimulus money, unemployment money, extra money, and they've decided to do other things. We have a 12-unit in North Providence that the family started off 2 years ago. Good. And now there seems to be an introduction to drugs. Besides them not paying the rent, they're disrupting the building. We've had to hire details quite a bit and actually sit at the building to try to stop. We had a drug raid at the building. And as we sit, no matter what's been happening there, I can't evict them.
Right.
And that's hurting the other people that are in there. There's 11 more tenants in there that are afraid. And we're part of a community there. We have a playground in the backyard of the 12 unit. We're vested in that community for over 25 years. And we can't control our property.
Right.
So now when I look at the legislation now, it will tie our hands even further. Because we have not gone after anyone that hasn't made an attempt to pay. And all of our tenants have, whether it's by the week, whether it's through other donations from associations, as far as Rhode Island Housing, United Way. But we have a few that our problems, it's under COVID now, but they're totally taking advantage of it. We have to be like that.
So what are the current rules under the state of emergency? And by the way, this is, as some of us like to refer to this, as I mentioned to the governor the other day, this is the 15-day shutdown that we just celebrated the first anniversary of. What are the rules that have been handed to all of you as landlords?
Yeah, sure. So basically, obviously, the moratorium started in March, where the states were enacting their moratoriums. And then the Trump administration enacted a moratorium that lasted through the end of the year. When Biden was in office, it was extended till the 31st of March. And now, as you know, it's been extended till the end of June. Right. So this is a CDC moratorium. Let's be very clear about this for your listeners, Pat. Okay. This is going to be decided in the Supreme Court of the United States, whether this is constitutional or not. There are some judgments in federal court that go one way. A couple of the latest rulings have been in favor of landlords, because where else can you go and tell somebody you have to work and you have to provide services and you may or may not get paid? You show me an industry where that's possible. Could I walk into Stop and Shop or Whole Foods? Right. I've thought about it. Like, just go pick up a packet of food and say, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, and I owe you. It's a necessity, it's an essential. So why is it okay? And I understand it's a pandemic. Don't get me wrong. All of us here, everybody in the coalition, all the groups understand, that we do have to play a part. However, the fact that a government entity can come in and say, hey, you got to work, but you may or may not get paid. And these are the same people, the same groups that are pushing a $15 minimum wage, correct? So I have to work for free, but yet you are pushing for a higher minimum wage. Does that even make any sense? It makes absolutely no sense to me.
Well, I worry about the practical implications because, again, not to belabor the point, but living in Queens like I did during rent control, I saw how people could be just driven into the ground. And what I think everybody wants, including your organization, is fairness. We understand that there's a terrible situation out there, but in terms of support, it doesn't take a lot for these rental monies to add up. Now, let's just say you've got someone in a $1,300 a month apartment, and you're 6-7 months into this. You're looking at nearly $10,000. What assistance has been given to landlords to cope with these? The inability just simply to get rent at any level.
Well, there's multiple things. So let's start here. There were multiple stimulus paychecks, 3 if I'm not mistaken, right? There was an added top up on the unemployment that was given to people. We had some money that was sent from the federal government that helped with the evictions. It was something that was not a lot of money, but I think it was about 15 million, Carol. I'm not sure if that number is correct, but wasn't a lot of money, but it helped stave off more evictions. And right now, in the state of Rhode Island, we have received $200 million for rental relief. And there's more coming. I believe there's another $300 million coming with the new act that has just been passed. Now, with all this money that's been available, there are tenants who qualify and have been using it. And so the vast majority of tenants, first of all, have paid their rent. Then you have the tenants that have come to an agreement with their landlords. And landlords have mostly worked with their tenants to help them, correct?
Right.
And then you have all the stimulus money. People who couldn't afford it have gotten stimulus payments. The landlords have worked with their tenants to get that, sorted out. The last part is tenants who don't qualify, who are still working, and just decide to take advantage of the situation. That's the part that we're concerned about. That number is rising. I know people that are owed about $40,000-$50,000 in rent on one building. Tenants have stopped paying just the entire year. So there's money that is there to be paid to landlords, to help tenants. The good tenants have paid. Landlords have worked out plans. These bills will now protect the people who have basically told their landlords, there's a moratorium, you can't touch me, I'm not paying you, end of story. That's who these bills are going to affect, and that's what these moratoriums are doing. Right.
So let's do a little bit of comparison. And folks, if you're just joining us, we've got an all-star panel tonight representing, I think, a group of people that's been underrepresented. Keith Fernandez is the president of the Providence Apartment Association. Carol O'Donnell joins us. She's the chair of the Rhode Island Builders Association. And then we've got a couple of young people who have joined us really to reflect on their initial purchase process. It's the whole mess is just terrible. And to Keith's point, a lot of good people have managed to keep current or close to current on their rents and acted in good faith. But there's a significant financial exposure, which is about to be exacerbated by pending legislation. Now, let's go through it. Currently, there are no evictions whatsoever allowed under the state emergency, and there's mandatory mediation before any eviction goes forward in the future. Under the Senate bill, you must renew lease on expiration, limited reasons for refusal, which landlord must prove. You have to wait 30 days before a late rent notice is sent. A tenant has 60 days to respond. It changes a 15-day wait for non-payment to 30 days, changes a 5-day tenant response to 60-day. What is the practical impact of that?
I think Joe and Alyssa should answer that question. What happens to you guys if you do not get your rent payment, and now from 30 days it's a minimum of 90 days to 120 days. What would that do to you guys?
We wouldn't be able to do it. We would have to sell or go into foreclosure, or I mean, our credit scores that we've worked years for to getting high to get to the point where we are, they would just plummet. Now it would be detrimental.
I mean, we're not that person who has hundreds or thousands of units, and it would certainly eat up profits for the whole year and make it again just very difficult for us to think that we can purchase and make money in such a market, and probably drop out of the state.
Now, if I'm correct, and again, as I always say, I'm not an expert. I just play one on the radio. There are a lot of, if you will, foreclosure protections for consumers right now because of the pandemic. What type of foreclosure protections exist for landlords?
So there is a foreclosure moratorium, but it's smoke and mirrors, though. If a tenant owes you $10,000,
right,
okay, you're never seeing that money.
Right.
I mean, that's the bottom line. I don't care what anybody says. People have been doing this a while. You'll never see that money. The difference is when the foreclosure moratorium is lifted, the banks are coming for their pound of flesh. You're going to end up paying the bank one way or the other. So they're not going anywhere. You're not getting the money from the tenant, but you still owe the bank. That's the difference. And people need to stop saying there's a foreclosure moratorium, so you're not affected. Yeah, I'm not affected now because I'm in forbearance maybe, but when everything's lifted, I still owe the money.
Right, plus interest. Because
and you need to pay like taxes. We still need to pay our taxes on time. Our trash pickup. We have units that we provide heat and hot water. We have heating bills in one building for $2,000 per month. We still have all those multiple bills to pay, along with our insurances. Again, trash pickup, snow removal. This year was a little bit difficult. $2,000 worth of stuff, and we probably are lacking close to $50,000 to $60,000 in rent just from a certain few that over the year that are buying all the Best Buy TVs, getting their stimulus money and telling us we can't do anything about it. And it's only a certain few, and that's the ones I think that are hurting the majority of us. Just a few.
Right, and ultimately, on a mortgage, interest will accrue. The balance will continue in terms of the equity balance in the mortgage will still continue to exist. You're just expected to pick up from scratch. And by the way, unless you work something out and you've got to have the financials to work it out, then you're on your own for catching up with that money. Whereas, something like overdue rent, again, it's the burden is on you to sue to collect that money. And quite frankly, most folks simply won't have it. It just disappears into the vapor, and then you're left literally holding the bag. This is my personal frustration when governments interfere in markets, because there's simply no way to make it all better. There just isn't. Unless they're willing, and if they even hinted at looking at you and saying, okay, we're going to wipe away this debt. The banking market would literally collapse, and it would affect everyone's ability to get financing. So it's truly a double-edged sword. Now, we talked about the changes to non-payment and tenant response rules. You have, as a landlord, currently have the option to terminate tenancy. What happens to that if, in fact, this Senate bill passes?
If you're talking about the just cause evictions.
All right. And how does that work in the real world? Go ahead, buddy.
So so basically just cause evictions is something that has been tried. They tried to do it in Boston, by the way. It did not pass because there was so much opposition to it. Just cause basically means is once your lease is up, the landlord must renew your lease unless there are very specific conditions under which you're allowed to, like criminal activity, so on and so forth. which is very hard to prove. Other than that, you have to renew somebody's lease. Now, to me, that means I own the property, but the government's running the property. They're telling me what I can do and what I can't do, who I can put in, who I can't put in. If I have to renew somebody's lease, let's assume that they're smoking in the unit. I was reading some testimonials for tomorrow's public hearing in the House, and one of the testimonies was, I have a tenant who is smoking who lives above me, and I can't get them out. I'm allergic to smoke. That would not qualify under just cause.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it makes absolutely no sense. I am hardened to hear that bill will probably not pass. But again, you never know until the end of the session. But that's just an extreme example. That same bill has the changing of the timelines. You have 15 days now. You can give them a 5-day notice, and the tenant has to respond in 5 days about the rent. They want to change the 15 days to 30 days before you can send the letter. And then they want to give an additional 60 days to the tenant. That makes it 90 days. Then you got to go to court and get a court date. So you're looking at another 30 days before you can get in. So, and then sometimes the judge will give them another month. So you're looking at 4 or 5 months before you can get a tenant out. That makes no sense. So you know what I'm going to do? And this is what I've stressed to all the top politicians that I've talked to. If this bill passes, I will restrict who I put into my apartments. Okay? Higher credit scores, longer time on the job. There's no way somebody's going to take a risk with somebody who's just started a job and needs a place to stay with his family or doesn't have a good credit. You know what that will do, Pat, to the entire market in Providence, Pawtucket, Woonsocket? It will crash. It will absolutely crash. You're talking about 75% of renters who would not be able to provide a good credit score. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's the reality. So, but if you're going to force me to have somebody not pay rent for 5 months in my property, I'm going to do everything to protect myself, as are your other panelists.
And again, this sounds so harsh, but I wonder sometimes if our elected leaders understand the concept of risk capital. And whereas in order to, you've got an enormous amount of money at risk in running this business with a fair expectation of a fair profit. And, and so it takes risk capital to do that. And there's a very real possibility in this case, if there's a collapse in the housing market, in the rental housing market, of a loss of that risk capital. None of this is guaranteed. Talk to me about Section 8, either of you, or any of you, jump in. And because one of the issues here is you as a landlord right now have the freedom to decide whether or not you want to qualify your property under Section 8 housing. What happens to that in this legislation, and what's the practical impact of that?
Carol, do you want to?
We have Section 8. We take a lot of different agencies. We have Section 8, the veterans, safe housing. We have a lot of that. And in tenants, the tenants actually do very well because they know what their responsibility is. They pay their share and they subsidize the other share. They almost have an extra layer of policing, like you said. Mm-hmm. I know there are some landlords that don't take them, but we do. But if we're forced, as Pete said, to do certain things that we have to put a risk out, in my 12 unit, I might only have 10 occupants in it, and those 10 people are going to have to pay for that 12 units. So now the rent's going to go up also.
Right.
So right. I'll give you I'll give you an alternate viewpoint, if I may, about Section 8. So Section 8 is good. I fought that in the city of Providence for a couple of years, and because to me it is a different. I look at it differently. Bigger landlords can afford to deal with Section 8 tenants. There's inspections, there's constant issues about certain things. Smaller landlords do not have that ability. to deal with Section 8. So the deal I made with Providence, the legislators, was if you have units, 7 units and above, okay, maybe they're bigger landlords, maybe they can accept Section 8. That's a compromise, as opposed to New York City does something very similar, by the way. But they wanted the whole shebang. And it was just, you have to take Section 8. They made it about discrimination. Okay, they made it about discrimination, that landlords are discriminating against people. But there's something very simple. I don't want to deal with Section 8, for example. It's not big. I have tenants who are, working class. This is workforce housing, who struggle to pay their rent sometimes in a couple of buildings, but they're hardworking tenants, and I'm fine with it. I mean, there's absolutely no problem there. The problem is Section 8 has mandates. Section 8 has things that a smaller landlord can't handle. And there are people who just choose not to do it, but it's not because of discrimination. In fact, in the committee in Providence, the only council person that grew up on Section 8 was an African-American councilwoman, Mary Kay Harris. And when I spoke to her and I understood her point, and I told her, I said, Mary Kay, if you vote for it and if you want it, I'll agree. And she was the only person in that committee, the ordinance committee, that got up and walked out and didn't vote on it. The people who were pushing the bill had absolutely no clue about Section 8. They had absolutely zero idea. The person that actually grew up on it said, you guys are right. This is going to raise the cost for every other tenant, because guess what, Pat? Section 8 pays a lot more than I charge for some units. So if the base rent for Section 8 is higher and my rent is lower, and you're going to force me to take Section 8, I'm going to jack up my rents to get as much as I can now, correct?
Right.
As much as Section 8 pays. So what does that do to somebody who doesn't have Section 8?
Where does this all stem from? Is this just really a misguided attempt to somehow wave a wand and make a disaster go away, but with one community bearing a significant part of the price? I mean, I'm assuming it's well intended. I would hope that no one is trying to just arbitrarily, capriciously hurt your community. What's at work here?
You got me there. I think the way the state is going, it's look good. I use the word look good, feel good legislation. That's what it is to me. There are no solutions here. There are absolutely no solutions. But if they find something that they think that is a problem, instead of talking to all the stakeholders, like this legislation that they just put in, mandatory mediation sounds fantastic. Everybody's for mandatory mediation. Nobody wants to have an eviction on their records. The landlords don't want to evict tenants, right? But what does that do? What that does is it just delays the ability of the landlord to recoup their unit. It increases the cost for all the other tenants in the building. Joe and Alyssa now have to charge the second floor a lot more rent because third floor is not paying. So when their lease is up on the second floor, their rent's going higher. That's the unintended consequence. Nobody cares about that in this state, and I'm tired of it. Carol's tired of it. Carol's the chair of the Builders Association. She's here on a night radio show because she's so angry by what's happening as well. The same with me. The same with Joe and Alyssa. This is absolutely outrageous. They find a problem and they just come up with something that is not the solution to the problem.
Well, now,
go
ahead, buddy.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I don't think that the legislators are educated enough to realize we've already are mediating with our tenants. We've already trying to come to some kind of solution. We don't need another layer of it, another month of not getting paid, another delay. So if you never recoup that money, it's the longer that you wait, the less you'll get paid.
Right. Are you starting to see fellow landlords having to sell, forced out, losing their properties yet, or have people been able to hang on?
Oh, there's definitely people selling their properties. Yeah, I mean, I'm seriously considering selling my properties because to me, it makes no sense if you're going to take away all the incentives to own property. I can cash out at any time. I'm done. You know, it's Joe and Alyssa. It's the nurse who called me and said, Keith, they call me a hero at work because I'm saving lives, and then they demonize me because I'm a landlord. You're going to hear from her tomorrow, testifying at the State House. You know, it's people like that. And it really angers me that somebody who's just bought her first house and trying to do well in life, this is what they have to deal with. When I bought my first property, when Carol bought her first property, we weren't out there testifying, doing all this kind of stuff. These folks have to deal with this now. We should be doing everything in our power to encourage them to buy, invest. They're from Rhode Island. They're our neighbors. They're our community. We want them to buy. We don't want some private equity firm from New York or LA to pick up property in Rhode Island. They don't get that difference.
Right. No, again, my heart breaks when I hear this stuff, because, the reality is like any business. Years ago I worked for myself for a number of years, and folks would come to me and they'd say, well, this is great. You work for yourself. You set your own schedule. And I kind of looked at them in shock. And after about the sixth or seventh person who said that to me, they said, well, you set your own schedule. And I said, yeah, if I'm awake, I'm working. And I particularly for folks who are new to the country, who are investing in real estate locally in their community, and it may very well be within the confines of an ethnic, subsection of the neighborhood, and they may be gearing it up to rent towards family members and or folks that they're sponsoring here in the United States, giving them a hand up to get involved. But those are the folks who literally have to do everything. Everything. They're the ones out plowing snow at 5 a.m. because God knows if it isn't plowed, they'll hear about it. They're the ones who get the calls at 8 o'clock at night because the boiler finally went, and they're the ones expected literally to have a solution within hours. And yet there's a group of people who say, well, if you can't afford all that, you shouldn't be in that business. And I say to them, at a certain point, you will create a cost structure where it is people operating locally are going to be incapable of owning real estate. And if they think they're challenged by landlord conditions right now, if they think they're challenged by the financial issues surrounding renting or home ownership, oh my God, if you're dealing with just don't wish for something. You might get that. If you end up dealing with one of these national real estate investment trusts who have a lawyer somewhere in an office in San Francisco, and it's merely just an automated filing to get you an eviction, and they don't care that, they're going to bounce you out, and they don't care that it's Christmas, they don't care that it's snowing out, you're just a number. If that's what they're wishing for, I pray to God they never get it. Because there's all of you are members of your community, and all of you look a lot of the people in the eye that you have or may or someday did rent to. And I don't know if the folks on Smith Hill fundamentally understand the relationship between the need for investor success to attract investors into a market, whether it be housing, small business, restaurants. No one opens up a restaurant and expects anyone to go broke. Why would they expect it of someone who has to invest very often hundreds of thousands of dollars with thousands of dollars a month of overhead without some expectation for a fair return on their investment? It's for the life of me, I don't get it. I understand life is hard right now.
Running for governor.
Yeah.
That's the basis of what American economics was built on.
Right.
Is that concept.
Right.
I love the diversity of Rhode Island. I embrace it. Again, the investors that are coming out of both, young people out of school and looking to invest in a community, and the investors that are coming from anywhere in the world to land here in Rhode Island, they're our lifeblood. We need them as a community as much as they need us. Without that fresh injection of investment and entrepreneurship and market disruption and market innovation, we're less of a community. Guys, it just seems so simple. I don't know what to tell you. I know that you're testifying at the if you will, the publication of this. It's already too late under the new rules of engagement to sign up to testify. It's the days right now of us just showing up to the State House and weighing in, as I used to do. I used to roam the halls and literally just sit there and bring a newspaper and read the testimony. And if something bothered me, much to the delight and joy of so many state representatives who knew me after a while by face, much to their delight, I would engage with them and have a wonderful evening of conversation and good cheer, which wasn't any of the above. So I just want you to know my heart is with you. I think, I'm going to aggressively distribute this video tomorrow. I don't know what impact it'll have for the hearing, but I want to leave people with this very important thought. Just because something is put for study tomorrow doesn't mean it's for study tomorrow. We all know that, and I'll use the fatal attraction analogy, these bills could come out of the bathtub anytime. And that's the appalling part of trying to run a business or some type of enterprise in the state, because once the season opens, there's no guarantees on anything, is there?
There isn't, but Pat, I'll tell you this, we're paying attention. There's never been a coalition like what has been formed. Housing providers were never as united as we see them today. You see them all over in the Facebook group, for example. We're going to see this through. And if you know me, Carol, we're going to see this through. We're not going to let people down. We are going to see this through to the end. And any legislator that votes for stuff like this, we will take notice, just like we did in Providence.
Well, my hat's off to you. I'm wishing you nothing but the best tomorrow. Please stay in touch. Please use this as a resource. I have a feeling if folks can let their guard down, let their preconception down, push out the myth for a moment, and listen to your side. And that was the whole purpose of tonight, to give you guys an opportunity to present your side of the story, so that folks, there's going to be some folks who are just going to put their hands over their ears and not want to listen. But I think it's a question of education, and I applaud your willingness to reach out to the community, to engage with people, to present the realities of real estate ownership in a state that's amongst the most expensive in the nation. And yet somehow, perhaps because of the entrepreneurial spirit, the local ownership manages to hold something of a balance here. And I challenge anyone to go to Hartford, to New York City, or to Boston and try and rent a similar apartment in a city that, quite frankly, isn't as vibrant as Providence, and try and find the same standard of living. And I will tell you, they will not have much luck. And that's a testament to all of you who continue to invest in your community. So thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having us.
It was great to meet all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
No worries. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Folks, social media is our lifeblood. Like us, share us, whatever. Subscribe to us either at facebook.com/The Coalition Radio or the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Folks, thanks for joining us. Have a great night. We'll be on tomorrow. Ramp, Real Access Motivates Progress, will be on at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. We're going live again tomorrow night. Tina Peterson, who is an inspiration to all of us, even in these challenging times, will be fighting again for access and also educating people who are facing all sorts of physical challenges in life. Have a good night.